The documentary I chose is called The Untold Story of Emmett Lewis Till. Emmett Lewis Till was born July 25, 1941, and the documentary is about his lynching, which took place August of 1955 when he was only 14 years old. The documentary opens up with clips of his family members talking about what kind of person he was, his cousins and his mom, and they said that he was very fun, but he was also very mischievous. Then it goes into talking about the Jim Crow era, which is when this took place, and the spirit of oppression that was put upon the blacks. They were forced to live in community, and they were sometimes even beaten or killed for even addressing a white person. And one of the people who was interviewed in this portion of the documentary is Charles Evers, who is Medgar Evers' brother. And Medgar Evers was a civil rights activist who was killed after Emmett's lynching. Emmett, in 1955, for summer vacation, went to visit family in Money, Mississippi. And his cousin, Mr. Parker, was told by his family, because he went down as well, that sort of about the South and how different it was from Chicago, where Emmett was raised. And just sort of that you have to be very careful of what you say and what you do because, just because of the attitude towards blacks at that time. But he didn't think that Emmett was told that as much. They would pick cotton during the day, and then one night they went to the store, and Emmett's cousin Simeon was sent in after Emmett just to make sure that he wasn't misbehaving or saying anything that he shouldn't say. And when they walked out of the store, a woman walked out, Mrs. Bryant, and she walked to her car, and Emmett whistled at her. And all the cousins were very afraid because they knew that this wasn't something that he should be doing, and they were very scared of what would happen, and they thought even that Mrs. Bryant was going to her car to get a gun because of what had happened. So they all got into the car and they sped away, and they saw a car following them, so they sped up, and then they got out of the car and they went into the cotton fields and just sort of hid there, but then they saw the car pass, and so they were, momentarily relieved, and they decided, like, we're not going to tell Grandpa about this, it'll just be behind us. But one of their cousins told them, Ruthie Mae Crawford said, you're not going to, this isn't going to be the last that you hear of this, something else is going to happen. So sort of to get out of town after that happened, they went to Greenwood, Mississippi, and they heard even there that people were talking about the boy from Chicago, and everyone sort of knew what had happened. Shortly following that, Mr. Bryant, the woman's husband, and J.W. Milam came to Emmett's family's home and took him. And they said that all they were going to do was beat him and then let him go. But as it sort of grew later into the night, the family knew that that wasn't going to happen. Willie Reed was one of the surprise witnesses for the prosecution, and he said that he saw the truck that Bryant and Milam had taken Emmett in at Sheridan's plantation, which is believed to be the murder site, but he didn't at that time know that Emmett was in the truck, and he even heard somebody being beaten in the barn. But Bryant and Milam came out and asked him, did you hear anything? And he said no, because he didn't want, to get into any trouble himself. And he didn't know that Emmett was in there. He just knew that somebody was. 3 days later, the body was discovered in Tallahatchie River, and it was bound with barbed wire to a 70-pound cotton gin. And the only way that they really could identify the body, because it was so mutilated, was by the ring that Emmett's mother had given him before he left to go to Mississippi. The sheriff wanted a very quick burial because he thought that it was sort of bad press for the body to be visible in Mississippi since it was so mutilated, and to have it be known that 2 of the residents of Mississippi had done this to a man. But Mamie Till, who was Emmett's mother, insisted. She rallied Chicago officials to bring the body to Chicago because she wouldn't be able to make it down to the funeral in time, and she wanted to be able to be at the funeral of her son. The funeral director was not permitted to open the casket. He wasn't supposed to open it, and so she asked for a hammer so that she could do it. She said, if you're not going to do it, I'll do it because I want to see my son. So he told her to go home and that he would open the casket and take out the body, and he would call her when it was done. And he did, and she said that she could smell the body from three blocks away. The smell, you could smell it. And she went in and she saw the body, and she saw that she describes sort of graphically the state of the body, but just some of the main things were that there was a bullet hole all the way through his temple. She said she could see daylight through the side of his face. His ears were gone, and his teeth were gone, and other horrible things that had happened to him because of Bryant and Milam. She insisted on an open casket funeral. She was, very adamant about that, very brave. She wanted everyone to be able to see what had happened. The funeral was very, very packed. A lot of people were there, and the documentary shows footage of the funeral, and you can see the people who are walking past the casket and looking into it, and just like the looks of shocks and the horrifying expressions on their faces. It's a very powerful image. Bryant and Milam were then arrested, and in between the arrest and the trial, when it was announced that Mamie was planning on going to the trial, she received many threats saying that they were going to bomb her house if she went to the trial. The trial was in Sumner, and a reporter, Mr. Wakefield, who was there, was interviewed in the documentary, and he said that there were even cans around town where you could donate for the defense, because he described the attitude around town as being that we know that Bryant and Milam did this, but we want them to get off anyway. The decision from the jury only took 1 hour, and it was not guilty. They acquitted Bryant and Milam, and it was later revealed that the only reason it even took 1 hour was for show, basically to pretend that they were having a fair trial and pretend that they were actually considering it, when really they were always going to let them go. They also went through a kidnapping trial, and they were acquitted of that as well. And later, in January 1956, in Look magazine, Bryant and Milam confessed. They wrote a confession for $4,000, although the film doesn't expressly state what was in that confession. And in April 2004, at the end of the documentary, it is said that in April 2004 the case was reopened. As far as the sort of review of the documentary, I really enjoyed it. It was very powerful. There was a lot of clips and images of at that time, and interviews with people at that time, which I thought was very cool. As far as bias goes, they don't really show the other side of the story, but I don't know if this is really a bias, because it's obvious that Bryant and Milam were the actual, did kill Emmett, and it would be hard for me to envision somebody coming away from the film still wondering and being suspicious of the film, saying that they didn't represent the other side fairly enough. There is, though, video of the trial and of various other parts, things that went on around that time, so there is representation of actual events that took place rather than just the interviewees now or when the film was made. So that is good. It does show actual events at that time. Like they had Emmett's uncle, Moses Wright, interviewed, and he isn't alive now, and he wasn't alive when the film was made, but he was interviewed at the time of the trial and the murder, and they got footage of that and put it into the documentary, which I thought was good. As for weaknesses, the only one I could really come up with was that there wasn't really discussion of forensic evidence or anything like that. It was mostly just about the emotion and of the murder and who it affected and the trial and the aftermath, but they didn't really say anything about the actual evidence collected or the legal proceedings, which, it's still a very powerful film, and it doesn't detract from the film a whole lot. And as far as, I would definitely recommend it, and it did a lot of good, the documentary did, because it got the case to be reopened, basically, because it, brought this back to the forefront of the public's mind, and then the case was reopened.